Is my microphone on? Yes, I think it is. All right, it's time to get started. So we're having a relaxed 5 o'clock start for California. So I want to welcome everybody to this PARC forum on making robots work to help us work remotely. And we'll explain how much work there is involved in doing that, I guess, to a certain extent. Obviously I want to promote this event, so let everybody know that we're on Twitter at #ParkForum, and you can find us on LinkedIn and Facebook, of course. And I want to promote the next forum, which is on November the 30th. And so that's How PARC Imagined the Future, Futures Day 40 years later, with Leslie Berlin and Chuck Geschke. I hope I pronounced that right. All right, so I'm the Master of Ceremonies. I'm in control of this event, and so I'm going to just give a quick summary of what we're going to do here. So I'm going to start out, because I'm the least knowledgeable about this area, but I'm going to explain why we're doing this, why now. And then we're going to have short expert speaker presentations preceded by my setting the scene. And then we'll have some chewy or even tough questions about these telepresence robots, and then at the end 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So let's just give a quick introduction to our esteemed speakers here, who are Leila Takayama. So she's a human-robot interaction researcher at UC Santa Cruz, where she leads the Re-Embodied Cognition Lab. Before returning to academia, she was a research scientist and area manager at Willow Garage. It's a robotics company doing open source personal robotics R&D, and senior user experience researcher at Google X, working on flying robots and what not. So you can maybe ask her about the not or the what afterwards. Susan Herring, who is the becobwebbed robot here. She's a professor of information science and linguistics at Indiana University, where she founded and directs the Center for Computer-Mediated Communication. And she's been researching and using telepresence robots in her professional life since 2012. Dallas Gurka has 20 years of experience as an electrical engineer, and he actually makes these things. So he designs power and motion control systems, and he has spent the last 8 years working remotely by inhabiting the body of a robot, which he is also involved in building and designing. And so that's kind of an interesting situation, eating your own dog food very much. And I am a social scientist at PARC. I'm a research fellow, which means I've been around here for donkey's years. I'm also an adjunct professor at UCSC, where Leila is, so we're colleagues. And in a former life, I actually was deeply involved in telepresence research. I had the longest virtual office share over video with somebody back in the early 90s. And I've recently become extremely interested in robots and interested in combining telepresence and robotics. So let's get into why are we doing this. So why did Leila and I cook this grand scheme up to try this and do a mobile telepresence forum that actually involved mobile telepresence. I mean, obviously, apart from it being a fun thing to try, I just wanted to go over the obvious motivations. Why mobile telepresence, or telepresence in general? Well, I don't have to say much about what's going on in the world with climate change. This is the changes in the Great Barrier Reef as it's dying up to 2016. Here's what it looks like before and after. Nobody who has not been under a stone for the past few months would be unaware of what's going on in terms of extreme weather, even in the United States, let alone other places which we tend to find easier to ignore. What's going on at both actually of the poles, disappearing ice and icebergs breaking away and whatnot, increasing desertification. And all of this, obviously, a major contributor is emissions that contribute to greenhouse gases, so automobiles and planes. And in fact, this is government statistics on this. So after electricity in general, transportation is the biggest single use that we're putting these carbon-based energy towards transportation, and it's contributing to the greenhouse gases that we're experiencing. And so obviously, you know, if we're going to save the planet and save ourselves as a result, we need to try to reduce driving, and there are various techniques that we could try to stop people from driving or stop people from flying so much. But tonight we're going to talk about these telepresence robots. And this is a very interesting beachhead application for robots in the workplace. It's starting to happen in companies near you right now. Does anybody work anywhere where you have telepresence robots? That's interesting. I'd say about 20% of the audience put their hand up there. That's very interesting. So it's starting to happen. You know, one of the questions is, well, where are these robots? Are we, you know, are they exciting? Is it a funny experiment people are trying? Are they really all that useful, or are they teetering on the trough of disillusionment on Gartner's hype cycle? And we like to say, no, very much not so. In fact, you know, they're just one of many kinds of robots that we're going to be seeing more and more of. They're not just cleaning your floors these days. As I say, they're becoming telepresence robots. There's robots going to be in retail, robots in security, robots doing all sorts of dull, dirty and dangerous jobs. And especially interesting in this space of telepresence, I also wanted to sort of have us all think about the fact that it's not just about sort of, you know, one thing, like a telepresence robot. There could be many manifestations of things in the future that are more or less autonomous robot and more or less telepresence enabled. And so I did this kind of design space where at the one end you have right-hand side things that are entirely telepresence, and at the other end you've got things that are entirely robot. And the higher you go up in this space, the more features and sophisticated they get. And you know, we've hardly started to populate this space yet. Boston Dynamics with its Atlas robot up there, which actually Leila told me is not what it appears to be. It's actually operated by 6 people, so in a way it's multi-telepresence. But supposedly we're going to have these sophisticated robots that are that are not telepresent at all. But I suspect we'll see a lot more things with telepresence in them than we are currently conceiving. Okay, so I now want to shut up and move on to the speakers to introduce themselves and their topics. I'm starting with Dallas, who actually makes these things. So off you go, Dallas. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Sound okay? Okay, I'll keep talking. I thought I'd just give a little background on myself, how I became a user of this technology. I grew up in a small town in Indiana. That's actually where I'm at right now. I attended Purdue University, got my degree in computer electrical engineering, and landed a job in Southern California. So when I graduated, my wife and I, we picked up, moved across the country, just a couple miles from my work. I had about a 7-minute commute then. About a year and a half later, I got a job opportunity up in Walnut Creek in the Northeast Bay Area. Same company, different location, or same company, different division. So my wife and I, we picked up and moved to Northern California, again, right near work. My wife, she found another job in the area. After a few years, my wife and I, we had a daughter. We liked the Bay Area, but we knew we wanted to raise our family back in that same small town in Indiana where we're both from, where we grew up, where both of her parents and my parents still live. Eventually we moved back. Neither one of us had a job lined up. I wasn't in a rush, but eventually I got a job. It was an hour and 15-minute commute each way, yeah. Now that I lived where I wanted to, I had to spend over 12 hours a week of my life commuting to work. So a few years later, I got a call from Willow Garage in Palo Alto. They needed somebody to design motor control system for their PR2 robot they were developing. I told them I was interested, but I wasn't interested in moving, and they were good with that. So I started working for Willow Garage remotely from home. It went pretty well. It was pretty easy to collaborate. I was just kind of defining the specifications and the features for the drive system, controls, the other electronics and things like that for the PR2. A lot of that can be done through emails, through phone, maybe a little bit of Skype sometimes. But when the design phase was done and we were working on applications for the PR2, things got hard. It was pretty much impossible to collaborate on these activities. They took place in some random location with a very dynamic group of people. We ended up putting a pan-tilt camera on a laptop in a cart, and I would have to ask somebody to push me around as I Skyped in order to be able to communicate and interact with people. We were a company that made motorized robots, and why was I asking somebody to push around a laptop on a cart? Had to be something better. So a colleague and friend of mine, Kurt Myers, we came up with this thing, had a motorized PR2 caster on the bottom, car battery, computer display, camera, microphone, speakers. And I recruited some local help. And in a weekend, out of my garage, we had what was known as Texas One there. You can see a picture in my garage. It was, or actually that was just outside of my garage. It was a very crude system and simple. I didn't want to spend much time on it. I had a job after all. There were things I was supposed to be doing. I didn't want to get in trouble for wasting a bunch of time and money making some stupid little gimmicks. So I shipped it out to California, wrote some software, and it worked. It worked very well, actually. I went from the least known employee at Willow Garage of about 60 people there working to the most known employee. Completely changed how I was able to interact with others. We split off from Willow Garage, created suitable technologies, and brought the Beam Pro and the Beam Plus to market. I think there are a lot of wonderful things with this technology. I have probably spent 16,000 hours over the last 8 years working with people, interacting with them, talking with them, just simply BSing with them through this technology. It can be used, I think, in a lot of great ways by a lot of different people. But for me, most importantly, I think it's enabled me to work where I want to work, and it's enabled me and my family to live where I want to live.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
But I'm not blocking the screen, am I, or should I back up?
You're perfect.
Okay, just want to make sure you can see me. All right, good, good, good. So my name is Susan Herring, and I put one of the main points of my little self-presentation right in the title. I am a mobility impaired professor, and I do use telepresence robots to remain professionally active. For the past 25 years, I've been researching computer-mediated communication. And then in 2003, I was in an automobile accident, as a result of which I suffered a spinal cord injury, and I have to use a reclining wheelchair to get around. Airlines have trouble accommodating me in my reclined position, and transportation by any other means, or pretty much any means, causes me pain. It causes me pain to move. And so of necessity, I have had to do a lot of video conferencing to remain professionally active. My telepresence needs, that of a university professor, are twofold. On the one hand, I have university obligations. I need to teach and advise students to participate in faculty meetings and doctoral defenses and so forth. But I also need to participate in conferences, often remotely, often overseas. Of course, delivering lectures, but attending other talks by other colleagues, and even socializing with other participants, going out for a beer or a wine in a cafe afterwards. 5 years ago, I discovered telepresence robots when I was at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. One of my colleagues was a hobby roboticist, and he had created an autonomous robot named PyRobot, and we adapted it to be a telepresence robot by adding a monitor and an iPad, I think, and speakers and microphone. And here I am participating in a research group meeting through PyRobot from home. Then I decided to buy a robot. I bought a Vigo, and here I am in Bloomington, Indiana, teaching in my classroom through a Vigo. Recently, I gave a guest lecture in France to a group of telepresence researchers who happened to have a Beam Pro. And I've even gotten to fulfill some of my need to socialize remotely. Here I am in my Vigo socializing with colleagues at Stanford during a happy hour. I was located in New York at the time. My professional interest is in communication and how various kinds of technologies mediate the way that we talk to each other and interact with each other. In the case of telepresence robots, I call this robot-mediated communication. As a linguist, I approach this from 4 levels. At the level of structure, I ask and analyze questions such as what kinds of linguistic units make up the communication, and how are they distributed across speakers and over time? At the level of meaning, we can ask, what is the talk about? What are speakers doing through their words, through their speech acts? At the level of interaction management, questions arise such as how do speakers get and hold the conversational floor? How do they manage turn taking, repairs, interruptions, overlaps, and so forth? And finally, at the broadest level of social phenomena, how are social identities such as gender, such as ability or disability, how are social activities, social arrangements expressed through discourse? I conceptualize robot-mediated communication as being a type of multimodal computer-mediated communication that is situated between video conferencing on the one hand and avatar-mediated communication on the other hand. Like video conferencing, it involves voice and audio, but it also involves navigation in physical space. Some people call it Skype on a stick. Like avatar-mediated communication, somebody is remotely controlling an avatar, except in this case, instead of being in the virtual world, it's in the physical world. Research is showing that form shapes function as regards communication and social interaction through telepresence robots. I look forward to a future in which we will have different kinds of forms. Robots with superhuman abilities, for example, robots with automated translation software that can automatically let you communicate with speakers from any other language. Holographic telepresence representations. This is an image of Stephen Hawking giving a TED Talk via hologram. Would we talk to somebody differently if we could see through them, if we could reach and put our hand through their face? Non-human robots. What if the telepresence robot was in the shape of a cuddly puppy? Surely our communication with that person through that device would be different. And of course, flying robots, which are totally a reality. Imagine drones with video conferencing capability. How would we talk to somebody who's flying alongside us? So these open up a number of new exciting vistas for research and design. And these are various robots that I have known, and I look forward to talking more about some of these issues during the question and answer period later on.
Cool. Thanks, Susan. All right, so I'm just going to give you guys a little brief overview. Yeah, thank you, mic 4. Right, so my name is Leila Takayama, and I've been also doing research in this space. Dallas and I used to work together at Willow Garage. So I'm going to tell you the story from my point of view as a person being in Menlo Park, meeting him for the first time. Right now, just so you know, I do consulting as Hoku Labs. I'm now at UC Santa Cruz, so just over the hill on the other side of that Bear Creek fire. And we've just started the Re-Embodied Cognition Lab there, where we're actually doing a lot of research using these robots. So we literally just threw this robot into the car and brought it over here for this forum. In case you haven't heard of it before, Willow Garage was this place in Menlo Park where we were doing open source robotics, R&D, developing this big PR2 robot that could do things like supposedly play pool, deliver beer, fold laundry, but it would take forever. And as we were doing that, we ended up making this thing that was actually super valuable right now, right, and spun that out as a company. This is what Dallas used to look like to me. So when we were working in Menlo Park, he was literally just like this voice in a box on a table. And you'd be like, who's that, right? And sometimes if we didn't like what he was singing, people would just sort of like hang up on him and be like, meh, yeah, we don't really want to hear that. Be like, oh, we don't know what happened. Like, we just lost the connection, right?
You turn the volume down.
Yeah, we turn him down too. We can't do that now because he doesn't have volume buttons on his face. Right, so because our teams like to argue that way in order to do collaborative decision making, it's a little hard to be present, right, when you can be turned off and hung up upon. So this is what his little cart looked like. That's actually one of our former coworkers, Derek, who's Skype on a laptop on a cart, which needed to be plugged in all the time, which was not great, right? And sometimes they would have these impromptu meetings in the hallway, and they'd be like, oh, sorry, we just forgot, right? Like, we didn't think we were going to have a meeting, and then Dallas would be left out of it. So we still, you know, it's harder to hang up on someone when you're looking them in the face, but it's not that hard to forget them if it's your job to push them around. So he stole some body parts from PR2, and they made this guy. This was the Texas one. I think one of the coolest things about this was we got to know Dallas as a person. When he rolled in looking like this, honestly, the first time I saw you do that, it was like, wow, that is so nerdy. But over a few months of periods of time, it was like, no, actually, like there's something here that's really valuable. Like we got to hang out with like your kids, right? Because we'd be hanging out at 5 p.m. here, which was actually 7 p.m. over there, right? And so sometimes other heads would appear on that screen, which was kind of cool because we got to know him. Also, you know, it's really easy to hang up on someone on the phone, but if Dallas is blocking your doorway in your office to ask you a question, you're gonna answer, right? Like, yeah, exactly. He can roll over your toes, especially if you're wearing slippers. So he's got more presence in a very visceral sense, I think, which helped. So part of my job as a human-robot interaction researcher there was to figure out, you know, do we use these because we just like robots? Or would other people like to use them too? Could this be valuable as a real product? So Kurt and Dallas built, God, more than 20 of these. 25. And we fielded them in a bunch of companies in the Bay Area and studied, like, what did people actually do with these? Normal people, not roboticists. They do, in general, about 3 things that we've seen in computer media communication, right? You show commitment by driving over here, parking your car, and putting your butt in that chair. You are showing commitment to your team, to your project, to being present, right? Putting yourself out there. And here, actually, this was the product director for Firefox at Mozilla. So he was living in Toronto, but his whole team was in Mountain View. And because he would come to the all-hands meetings in Robot, his team started feeling like he was actually more present and committed to that team and the projects that they were doing. Don't mind that like his head's actually blocking the view of the woman behind him. Those are details that we work out. But really, because he felt more present in the space, he became a stronger leader for that project. I mentioned, you know, blocking the doorway, pouncing on people in the hallway is another way to capture attention and to maintain it, right? It's kind of hard to do that via email or even phone calls because people have plausible deniability and they might not answer their phone. But when you show up in Robot, you're much harder to ignore. Finally, I think the most important thing that you do via these is you build social connections, right? I said we got to know Dallas as a person. These are our coworkers playing pool, and these are our other coworkers heckling the guys who are playing pool because they don't have arms and they can't play pool, but they can totally make fun of the guys who missed the shot, right? And that sounds touchy-feely and sort of like superfluous, but actually this is how you build rapport with your team members. This is how you make distributed teams work together as a team, as opposed to just a bunch of transactions that people are making across a long distance. So I thought, to me, that was the most important thing that we kept seeing. These impromptu interactions were actually more important than the formal communication that was happening in the meeting room. And that's why that's interesting. When these guys spun out as suitable technologies, not only did they land on the Big Bang Theory, which is pretty cool, as Shellbot, but you know, also we started seeing them in places like the TED stage, right? So if you're Edward Snowden, there's a reason why you might not want to be in the United States here in person. If they arrest the robot, who cares, right? So there's lots of different reasons why people might want to use these robots, and I think it's really interesting. Once you put this out in the world, you get to see what those uses are. I'll leave that at that there. One of the things that we did as social scientists was try to make sense of, okay, so we've got this sort of starting point. We have a prototype. How are we going to design it better to support the needs of the people who are using it? So one thing we noticed was people like to decorate the beams a lot. At Firefox, they put like the dinosaur sticker on them, right? And at Google, you'd see like the nuclear hats on top. And that was kind of interesting because we actually do know that people, when you dress more like each other, football teams all wear a uniform for a reason. It makes you act more like a cohesive group. So we actually ran controlled experiments where we let people decorate them. You know, you're on the blue team, you've got a blue robot. And I'll skip to the punchline, it totally backfired. When people would dress up these robots, their color, and we tell them you're on the blue team, they're like, I like the robot, but who's this person invading my machine? They started feeling connected to the robot, but not to the person who's actually operating it. So I think if we were ever going to rerun that study and do this in real life, you would actually, like, we would decorate these together instead of just the locals decorating it by ourselves. So yeah, sometimes data flies in your face. Victoria sort of alluded to this a bit, and I think it's a really important point, right? Like, these are telepresence for now, but really you can add autonomy to them. The first ones that we had LiDAR on the base so that you wouldn't run into obstacles, right? So just like the autonomous cars driving around Mountain View here, these, you can also have them not run into chairs and people and desks, because that's actually kind of obtrusive when people do that. So we ran studies looking at, can we help people drive more safely and effectively using obstacle avoidance? Turns out you can, but not everybody likes that. There's some folks who still drive stick shift. And those people will fight that autonomy. If they want to run over that chair, they're going to run over that chair. And if you don't let them, they're going to take much longer to finish your obstacle course. So I think my lesson from that was people are not homogenous. I mean, as a psychologist, we know this, right? Individual differences matter. And some people just need to be more in control of the situation. Some people are going to need manual override, even if we give them autonomous assistance to drive better. And this is sort of hinting towards, right? Maybe we shouldn't be just standing around holding our breath waiting for Rosie the robot to come and deliver us a beer. Maybe we should just be using bits of autonomy to make things better right now. And I think this is one example of that. So we've done a bunch of studies using these. That's just an example of a couple, and we can talk about more of them later if you're interested. We looked at things like, you know, people visiting their grandparents, right? Turns out that grandma and grandpa that we worked with, actually with Paleta and Avanitas over here, were like, yeah, it'd be cool if the grandkids visited, but really I'd rather hang out with my friends. And by the way, yeah, the robot could come and visit me, but really I'd rather you put it out at the baseball stadium so that I can go and like heckle the players from the stands when my family goes to the game. So I think there's these really interesting use cases that we haven't even begun to imagine yet. And by doing this kind of research, right, putting them out in the world, making them real, that's how we're going to really learn what they're good for. So that's the kind of stuff that we do over at UC Santa Cruz, but also with lots of collaborators, right? We've got projects going together with Indiana University also that are ongoing right now. So if any of you all are interested in playing in this space, it's a really rich research and development area that really doesn't have enough people helping out. So if any of these questions inspire you, I'd encourage you to come and chat afterwards, because we're actively working on developing and designing these right now. All right, you ready for the firing squad? Okay.
All right,
Do you guys
so,
want to come over?
yeah, I think we're going to rearrange the furniture.
Yeah.
So we...
They get to be sitting, but I don't.
The human beings just can sit down.
Yeah.
I said that was a very tactless thing, wasn't it? I said human beings, the present human beings.
Yes.
Should I
In
call you a
person.
robot or a person?
Question.
How offensive. All right.
I think you're good there. Yeah.
Oh, we just lost the screen. Can we bring back the screen? It's just to remind me, because I have a terrible memory and I didn't bother to make any notes, that these are the questions that we're going to ask. And I noticed that time has slipped along. I have not been a dictator on the short 3-minute presentations. So what we'll do is I think I'll intersperse audience questions in with these discussion points that we wanted to talk about. We had a couple of meetings before this where we tried to think about what would be some of the really interesting nitty-gritty questions in this space. Although anybody who's got even better nitty-gritty issues is welcome to bring them up. But I wanted to start us off by talking about this issue, which has been in the press a lot lately. There's been well-known people such as at Yahoo and Google and IBM and other places talking about not wanting people to work remotely. And there don't seem to be a lot of telepresence robots around. They're sort of slow to take off. So I wanted the contestants, the presenters here to talk about why they think these issues are. What is it with this not liking people to be telepresent, and how can telepresent robots help with this?
We're all like, not it.
I mean,
Who wants to start?
so I think, one, they have, a lot of these big companies, they have, you know, policies for working remotely, right? And the thing is, that's a policy for working remotely, whereas the telepresence really changes that. You know, it's a completely different dynamic, and it's hard to, you know, I think the companies still categorize this as working remotely, but yet it's a very different sort of entity when you're actually beamed into the office and you're there present. You know, I'm working at doing my stuff, but people can see me, they know where to find me. I can go anywhere that I need to be, sort of thing. And so I think that's probably one of the big parts of it.
What's the deal with not being in the office? What are people missing out on?
Well, I think some of these big companies have, you know, they've kind of run the numbers, they've done their tests, and they find that, okay, maybe people aren't always as productive as we would hope they were if they were, you know, sitting at home, sort of thing. I think. And so I think they might have adopted those policies. I actually think
the data says that people are actually more productive when they're working at home. There's an organization that does statistics on telepresence and actually has collected data on this, and you find that people actually get more done at home.
I mean, I like the aspect of being there, you know, as part of the office and around everybody, but I love the fact that I can mute them. I can just, you know, whereas everybody else in the office is wearing headphones, or they're, you know, or they leave and go somewhere else or whatever else. You know, I can just simply mute them, or worst case, I just disconnect, and I can really concentrate on what I need to do. You know, I'm
going to interrupt you on Susan's behalf, because I think she's making noises as if she wanted to say something there. Susan?
Well, I don't know. My situation's a little different, right? Because of my disability. But I prefer to teach in person. I feel like the face-to-face contact is richer. However, if it means not being around, not seeing people, or seeing people, I would much rather be able to be more present around the workplace. I have a concern because of my mobility impairment that I'm not seen enough. When you're not seen enough, you tend to be a bit forgotten. And so, you know, it's valuable for me in that regard. But my situation, I think, is a little bit different.
But again, I mean, we haven't really tackled this issue. What is it that Google and Facebook and IBM and Yahoo, what is it that they think that they're achieving by having people being in the same place?
What are they achieving? I mean,
what is it? Yeah.
I think fundamentally one of the big parts for companies like those is they do it because they can, right? I mean, they have enough people that are dying to get into those doors and work there that they can say, listen, if you want to work here, you got to be here every single day. You know, you got to move here, you got to, you know, that sort of thing. And they can do that, right?
And even if people are less productive?
I think, honestly, it's short-sighted to do that, to do what they're doing. Because, right, if we hadn't had Dallas on our team doing electrical engineering on our PR2, we would have been much slower on our project. Like, you miss out on the talent that doesn't happen to live in the exact same neighborhood as your headquarters. You're missing out as a company on getting amazing people who, you know, it depends on what their alternative is. And some people who are amazing, just like, they're not gonna move to California. Our rent is crazy high, right? And I think if you're a smart business, this is a great way to go in order to get the talent that you really need, the specific talent that you need, not just the most convenient to hire.
You know, and I think, you know, we talk about how the world's, you know, it's getting smaller because, you know, it's so much more global, but I kind of feel like these last, you know, generation or so, people are stopping, not moving as much, you know. You know, the previous generation, the family moved where the husband had a job, you know, and if his job meant he moved across the country, it really wasn't much of a thought. They just picked up and they did it. And that doesn't happen now. And especially you have a lot of dual career families, right? That just doesn't work. You can't do that. And so, I wanted to raise my family in the small town that I grew up in, that, my son at the age of 8, he just rules the neighborhood. There's 10 kids or so in this neighborhood, and they go wherever, and they, I don't have to worry about them. I feel safe, with them around. I don't have to worry, about strange people or, bad traffic or anything like that type of thing, and I
I think that's your what I'm trying to get at is, I'm going to just say it, right? But a lot of these CEOs have been or senior people have been saying that there's something about being together, right? Being in the same place. This is why Steve Jobs had the buildings made the way that he did at Pixar, and I believe the same thing at the new, Uber space, I shouldn't call it the Uber space, the giant new Apple cameras, but is to force people to congregate, bump into each other, get around the water cooler together, to interact with each other. Marissa Mayer, Patrick Pichette, they've all been saying, it's magical having people in the same place, right? And so telepresence, can you do that with telepresence? I mean, it leads into this, aren't WebEx and Skype, etc., good enough?
Well,
what's the difference? Why do we want a stupid robot?
Listen, it's not as good as being there in many aspects, right? I mean, the technology is still in its infancy. There's advantages. I would much prefer to attend a meeting in a Beam than physically being trapped there on the seat. But in a lot of other cases, it's not as good. So, these companies, if they can, they make, everybody be there. And I think there are some advantages to that. But,
Yeah.
What do you think, Leila?
Yeah.
I don't think they understand the informal communication and all that rapport building that's happening in the hallways. Like, it can happen. If you're walking by someone who happens to be a robot, you chit chat with them. If I'm making coffee at the coffee machine, that is the best time for a person in a robot to come and pounce on me because I'm stuck, right? While the coffee is percolating. And that's how you build those relationships. That is where the magic happens. And I think it can happen via robot, and it already is. I mean, that's why we bothered doing this, right?
Yeah, I used to have a colleague at Apple called Tom Erickson who used to work remotely most of the time, and he would show up at one week out of every 4 or a month out of every 2, I can't forget, but he was an expert at it. And, but he also was very good at observing what was going on, and he would step back and philosophize. And one of the things that he said that, he really missed as somebody who was remote was that even though you could do conference calls, is that when people gather for a meeting, there's a lot of stuff that goes on before and after the meeting because people come together and go, oh, I really wanted to, can I just see you afterwards? Because I just want to have a word about you about that thing. And it's stuff that isn't on the agenda, but when people come together, they're reminded, oh, there's some really important thing that I need to talk to that person about.
But not in the meeting.
And it's opportunistic and it's not on the agenda. And so the person who joins by telecom doesn't get any of those opportunities. They miss out on all of the, oh, what's going on with your family kind of chit chat. And then they got cut off at the end of the official agenda.
Yeah, and after the meeting, can you believe that he said that? Oh my God, we're totally not going to do that, right? And you miss it if you hung up on the conference call. Yeah.
Well, I know Willow Garage, it was amazing how much work got done in the hallways.
Oh yeah.
Right? I didn't feel necessarily a lot of meetings, and definitely wasn't a lot accomplished in meetings. There was at times, I guess, I won't completely poo-poo them, but it was done in the hallways, in the lab, in the, wherever, just very haphazardly sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't there,
you would have missed it.
Wouldn't be a part of it.
So I think robots really sort of start to get at some of those issues. Susan, did you have something you wanted to add about that, your experience with this?
Yeah, actually I was. I think that the computer-mediated communication research has something to say about some of the questions that you're raising. So for example, studies have found that groups of people who meet face-to-face first tend to bond socially and to like each other better. But if they then communicate via distance technology after that, they're perfectly fine socially and they get more done. So it may be that thinking about the CEOs who want everybody to be there all the time, I do think the research shows that people can be more productive at home. In fact, probably generally are if they're disciplined. But it may also be valuable to have face-to-face time, particularly in the beginning when groups start to form, to forge that social bond initially, and then let people go off and work more effectively out there. That's just something that's suggested by the literature.
Yeah.
And, so I wanted to also get onto the clunkiness of robots. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of shortcomings. One thing I was just noticing is that it's impossible for you guys to see out of the corner of your eyes, and that Dallas has no idea when Susan is trying to talk, and you're sort of a little bit handicapped, right? So, talk a little bit about what that means. Like when you are a robot, what is it like?
I mean, it feels to me like I have a stiff neck sort of thing. I don't have, you guys have your eyes can instantly move side to side. The camera is a pretty wide view, very similar to your eyes, but then your neck and your head can move very quickly sort of thing. And yeah, those are limitations right now sort of thing. How do you better immerse the person in the environment? I think audio is actually much more important than necessarily some of those video details, but the video is definitely part of it.
Yeah, my greatest frustration has been with the audio. I have several robots. One of them is actually almost unusable because the audio input quality is so poor that the sound is garbled. I can't really hear what people are saying to me. And when you can't hear what people are saying, communication becomes basically impossible. So that for me has been a big limitation.
Yeah,
another
people think you're
is
stupid.
The cognitive and physical effort required to steer the robot, to move the robot, which for me detracts from effort that I might otherwise invest in communicating and thinking. So I'm a big fan of the idea that we could automate some more features of these robots, especially point-to-point navigation. I think would make life easier for people driving these robots.
I like that notion, but I also don't want people to be detached from it, right? I don't want them to go push a button, I want to be there, and then they're off doing something else, and now they're not, it's just kind of like driving and texting at the same time. You want them to be in tune with where they're going and part of that too. So I think there's a balance there to be had. I think there's definitely a lot of semi-autonomous functionality that can be incorporated into to help and to aid.
Yeah. What's the biggest handicap that you really feel? Like, so you mentioned that like better audio. What you mean by that is actually being able to hear like 360 surround sound, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also you're not in control of how loud you are. I noticed, Dallas, when you started out, you were really loud and then suddenly you got turned down and you had no say in that. Right, and you probably didn't even know that happened.
I have somebody else in control of my audio.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody over the back of the room there is in control of whether we get to hear you too loud or too quiet or at all.
Yeah, no, we have in the robots, we have limited feedback, right? I mean, we don't have, for the most part, these robots do not have depth vision, right? Because there's only a single camera looking in each direction, and so I can't really tell how close I am to something. You may have noticed that I practically ran into Dallas's robot there when I backed up after I spoke. And I don't have feedback about how loud I am. I didn't even know what I looked like when I first started using this robot this evening, and I was only told afterwards that I'm dressed up for Halloween, right? So I don't have control over a lot of my own bodily movements and self-presentation.
Yeah, your coworkers get to give you a Halloween costume instead of you getting to choose, which is weird. I mean, on the local side of this interaction, I mean, we took a little while setting up, right, to get ready for the presentation because. Oh my,
yes, the setup for this was quite something.
Yeah, you think it's hard to get a laptop on a wireless network? Try doing robots. And also, they're mobile, which is great, except it also means that you might mobile your way over into a little Bermuda Triangle of Wi-Fi def, right? And now you've got a dead robot body that we have to go and fetch, right, and drag you back into, the safe zone, right? And that is an issue. Like most buildings, we think we have good Wi-Fi, but actually, like you open it up in your office, you do some work, you close it, and then you walk to the meeting room and open it up again. There's a ton of Bermuda triangles, I will bet, between point A and point B. And these are great devices for finding those holes. And then we get to deal with it, right? We, the human wranglers, we no longer have to plug up these in to help charge because they can just, dock themselves. But there's a lot of things, I mean, like that we have to do on this side to make sure that this works.
Yeah.
And that's new, right? With the telephone, I don't worry about it dying in the hallway.
No, you worry about your cell phone dying in the hallway.
That's true. I do baby my cell phone.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, we, for bigger customers at Suitable, we'll do surveys, Wi-Fi surveys of their office and, find all those dead spots, give feedback as to what to improve and how to do things. Because yes, I'm eating my own dog food. I know how frustrating it is when I'm trying to get from point A to point B and I can't get there, right?
Yep, totally, yeah.
Now, I said
And
I was
I
gonna,
get tired of having to ask somebody, can you go retrieve that, or can you,
I said I was going to open up the floor for questions, Ash, and I forgot to do that. So, does anybody have any interesting things to interject here? And, wave your. I think you were the first guy. So, do you want to start up?
Yeah, I think it's the same problem we have with Skype at work. I can't see body language. I get so much communication from that person and their interest in the topic and their objections to the topic and, all of that. I don't know how you can replicate that in robots, but that seems like a big lacking point.
Yeah, the question was about body language, right? And like reading all the nonverbal things that are going on. I mean, one thing, there are versions of these robots that have larger screens, and so you can show more of the body. And actually, some of research that's been done at UC Berkeley found that if in Skype, if you just crop the head versus actually show some of the torso and a bit of at least the top body language, you actually build more trust with the other person on the other side, and you can read more, right? You kind of understand a little more of what's going on. If it's someone you never met before, it might be a little harder, right? Because you don't know what their standard is for how they move and what that means. And that's not an end solution, but I think it is a suggestion for like a direction to go.
I definitely agree. I'm not a fan of box framing the head in the display sort of thing. And I'm actually in a presentation mode. Because I am a little bit closer to the camera. Normally the camera's zoomed out. Normally this is the size in my interaction. So you do because I talk with my hands. And those have to be a part of the conversation. So I definitely do that. But I also agree. I've had coworkers when it comes to, the rest of that body language and things like that subtleness. I've had coworkers that tell me I overcompensate with my facial expressions. So
you're just expressive.
Yeah. So maybe and they tell me sometimes I kind of need to tone down my facial expressions.
One of the things that happened before this was that also Dallas is very upset because we didn't manage to get some Beam Pros in here in time. And little can anybody tell, but he's actually normally a big guy. What, 6'5"?
No.
6'2". He's used to being the tallest guy, in a group of people. And he doesn't like being in a puny little robot. Wouldn't want to be Leila's height. And
you need a bigger head too.
So the robots actually do distort these sort of like unconscious dynamics that we have between people, for good or for ill.
Yeah.
It's a great equalizer for all of the robots together being the same height, but it's also an unequalizer if you're the only robot in the room, unless you're a really big, beastly robot.
That was something between Leila and I at Willow Garage. I'm like, well, it needs to be bigger. And Leila's like, no, you're just right. You're just perfect.
He was exactly my height in that robot.
Susan, do you want to interject?
Well, so I'm normally very low. I'm very tall. I'm 5'10", but I'm in a reclining wheelchair. So I'm used to having everybody look down on me. So when I'm in a robot, I'm actually taller. I actually see the world from a taller perspective than I might otherwise. So, I don't know, does that bother me or not? I think it's good. I think I like being a little taller again.
Yeah, I mean, we've even done experiments where we found that people in taller versions of these robots are more persuasive than people in shorter versions of these robots, which sucks for short people like me.
I don't believe you, and I'm not persuaded at all by anything that you've said so far.
I should sit higher.
Oh wait, no, you're getting more persuasive.
I mean, I think I like this fact of being on par, right?
Yeah.
Being on par. the Beam Pro, your head is much closer to what the local's head size is, sort of thing. The width of it is very much, similar to the width of a local person type of thing. The weight of it is similar. All of that sort of thing. So I like the fact of being on par. I don't like it being too far on one end or the other type of thing. This device here was designed really for the home and consumer model. This is fantastic to, just kind of be in the corner of your home if you do travel a lot and want to visit your family at home, or, my visit, your elderly grandmother or something like that. I have one of these in my 94-year-old grandmother's assisted living home, and my aunts and uncles use it every single day. They live across the country, and she in no way could handle a laptop and Skype or a tablet and FaceTime or anything like that. But the Beam can come and go, and she's as happy to see everybody as she could possibly be.
Let's take another question from the audience. Who's
Yes, the robots you're showing and the concepts you're talking about seem to be limited to the eyes and ears. Is that a definition of the field, or is it possible that it could extend to other things, including maybe having a surgeon operate from remotely?
Yes. I mean, just down the street, right, Intuitive Surgical does in-room robot telepresence surgery, right? So that you don't have to cut a large incision in the body. You just cut, it's laparoscopic, but it's robotic, right?
I think the majority of surgery is going that way, right? And actually making incisions only internally.
Yeah,
So
prostate
you
cancer
never
is
make a
now-
hole on the outside. You can go from up here or up there.
Smaller incisions, right? And
Yeah.
it's just,
And
you
it's
have
all
better
robot.
recovery.
Yeah.
Yep. And the
I mean, I
surgeons are
think
operating, but via
remote
robot.
manipulation is
It's real.
something and has some value, but I think relatively, look in the workplace. I mean, really nowadays, how much stuff do you really touch, and how much do you manipulate, sort of thing? Doors, light switches, your chair, that sort of stuff. I mean, you do, but compared to otherwise what you physically, I would much rather, be able for this head to articulate down and zoom in and look at something up close in detail or something like that, much more. And or the only time otherwise that I really want to manipulate something is when I want to pick it up and stick it in front of the camera so I can, see real detail and look at something like that. I mean, remote manipulation adds a whole nother level of complexity. It's definitely something in the horizon and something I think that's attractive.
Are you able to tell us whether you're working on that?
We work on all kinds of things.
Good answer.
As far as what things that might or may not work or be practical or that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Looks like Susan's raising her
Susan?
hand. Speaking of gestures.
I see a lot of potential for voice control. So one of the things that's most frustrating to me is that I can't open doors when I'm in the robot, and therefore I can't really be very independent. I always have to have a handler or somebody to help. But with voice-controlled door opening and turning lights on and off and so forth, we're already seeing this technology now. So I think that holds a lot of potential for enhancing the independence of telepresence robots. Don't you think, Dallas?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of future before they have to get into manipulation, and a lot of capability, and a lot of room for advancement, before we do that. And yeah, some simple things of automatic doors and automatic light switches, which, even without remote presence robots, automatic light switches are making more and more sense. So
That segues nicely into the last topic, actually, was about the notion of superpowers. For example, I don't know whether you've noticed, but these guys have been on a Skype chat and they're like, telepathically able to communicate with each other without you seeing it. I mean, robots can have the ability to pick up sounds we can't hear, light we can't see. They could be really teeny, they could be really strong, they could, do all sorts of things that normal humans or we humans cannot do. So as these sort of augmented or diminished beings, what do you think that we might expect to see in the not too distant future?
what we expect to see or what we should see?
Either one.
Leila, I mean, I think Leila's done a lot of studies on that as far as, understanding what is appropriate and what is good. And, the notion of we all want eyes in the back of our heads, but do we want our colleagues to have eyes in the back of their head? You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's an issue, the social issue, right, of equity. So when we first started working on these, we made a design rule, which was if you see me, I see you, which means Dallas can't drive around with a blank face being a creepy spy bot running in my office at 2 in the morning, because people were doing that when we first started making these. And when a blank-faced machine starts bumping your chair in the middle of the night as you're working on a paper deadline, it's creepy, and that's not okay. And so we made a rule where if you're not showing your face, you don't get to drive it. We will cut off your control of the motors, right? And that was a design decision. Yes, it's technically capable, but should you, right, is the question.
Yeah.
Also, if we could have put like amazing microphone arrays on this so that I could hear whispering in the back of the room and you'd have no idea that I'm listening to your conversation, that I shouldn't be, right? And we purposefully didn't go in that direction, because if this is going to be a device for social interaction, I need to understand and have expectations that make sense to me, that feel more equal, right? In some sense, Dallas could be way more powerful than me right now, and that's not gonna really make me wanna hang out with him, right? Like, where are your eyeballs, right? What can you see? What can you do? But in another application, maybe you do want the spy bot, right? It kind of depends on what they're being used for.
All right.
I think there are specific applications where you could have, very high-end technologies and superhuman capabilities, but I don't think that's a general use case.
Yeah, for presence.
So you think that we will just arbitrarily constrain robots to be the same as humans, right? Because it's easier for people to deal intuitively with something that's more like a human being than something with unknown capabilities.
Yes.
Susan, yeah.
But those expectations could change. I think that there's a general tendency with new technologies to use them for old purposes and to conceive of them that way. But then as we become more familiar with those technologies, their unique potentials start to be perceived and exploited, and people eventually start to feel more comfortable with them. So I don't think we should limit our imagination to thinking that we have to create robots to try to imitate human beings. They will never be as good as face-to-face human beings, but they can be better than them in some ways. And at this point, I think we're just limited by the point where we are in the development cycle of the technology. Right?
Yeah, it's still early days. Yeah.
I've been given the signal that we've got time for one more question, and I see someone already has the microphone in hand.
Yeah, it's a quick question on the design of the robot. I see that it's basically made like a rectangular, horizontal. The typical face is more
Portrait.
vertical than rectangular. I'm just wondering why people pick this way. In fact, why not even the round shape, right? Make more.
Do you want to comment on that? I mean, this one over here, right, is portrait over there, as opposed
Yeah,
to
that's the double.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay, we
iPad
have
on a
some of
stick
those.
robot.
I mean, part of what we're limited by, right, is like what are the component parts that are available, what are the drivers that are available, how do you cost reduce this thing so someone could actually use it now? There's a lot of things that could have been done, right? Like we could have put haptic touch sensors all over the thing so that Dallas can tell exactly where you're poking him when you poke him on the shoulder, but we didn't because of cost, I think is part of the reason.
Right. There is such a thing as a minimum viable product where
Yeah.
you have to prioritize which features you really need and which features people won't be willing to pay all that extra money for.
Right, but it is a good empirical question, right? Like you try running an experiment where you've got landscape versus portrait, and you're going to see different amounts of the body, and like how does that matter, right? Because we do have those other studies that have showed that showing more of the body could be better. I remember there's an executive from a large corporation in Silicon Valley who came over and was like, I need a bigger head. We were like, okay. And so I grabbed one of the big monitors that we use for software development, and we put it on a mobile cart and pushed it around, and we're like, hey, try this out. And I think it might have been Keenan who was doing it. So we're just talking with him like normal, like let's just see what this feels like. Let's prototype it, right? I think he like leaned in a little too close to his webcam on his side, and his head was like 4 times human size. And I was like, that's not okay. Oh my God. Everyone's body language was like backs against the wall, like backing away from him. So I think, yes, we can go superhuman, but we also should prototype it and try it, because sometimes it's not a good idea. Maybe we get used to having huge heads.
There's another thing you can do as an amateur singer as well, is that you can use a pitch distorter. That's one thing that I know a lot of women complain about, you know, is like the alpha male booming voice that everybody instinctively, you know, listens to. And if you wish to have a man's voice, which I believe Laurie Anderson did, you know, she had one of her things where she actually spoke with a male voice, and it completely changed how she sounded as a person. And I think there are definitely ways in which robots actually will, I think, help people overcome some of our baser monkey instincts to disrespect little people, not listen to people with female voices, or disrespect people who look a bit different, or whatever. I mean, there's definitely some really interesting spaces to explore there.
Yeah, being mediated could be a good thing, right?
And I think we're out of time. I'm being told, yes, we're out of time. Okay, so I want to thank the expert speakers here and thank the audience for coming. So.
Thanks. So we're going to hang out and mingle, and these happen to be really great for doing that. So I'd encourage you to come and chit-chat with everybody up here.
All right, off with these microphones. I guess we can turn the...
All of the mic.
What?